All right, well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third edition or the April edition of Success Spotlight. Today's guest is going to be no other than Drew Sill. Drew has been in his tenure with farmers. He was a area sales leader as well as a district manager and has spent the last 17 years, currently in his 18th year, as a farmers insurance agency owner. So over that time, Drew was a President's Council recipient with farmers in 2015, which is the top 1% of farmers agents across the country. And of course, currently is a Toppers Club recipient too as well. So in Drew's free time, like spending time with his 5 kids, it sounds like doing anything really outdoors, is a competitive golfer as well as a runner, and really, again, just doing anything outside. So Drew, I appreciate you for joining us. Excited to talk through exactly what you've done over the time that you've been in the insurance realm to take on staffing and recruiting. And I know that as a part of that conversation, we'll talk about your ability to do all the things that you love doing in your free time, but then also your ability to open up new ventures like Next Direct Mail, that has allowed you to do that. So again, thank you for joining us, Drew. Excited to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course. So let's get it started right from the top. So again, I know that you've been in the insurance realm for a while. So of course, being in your 18th year as an agency owner, I'm sure you've done different things and have, kept some things consistent throughout your time as an agency owner. But from the beginning stages, I guess, what makes you decide to start looking for staff, and where do you go to make all of that happen? Obviously, as an IdealTraits user, I'm sure that's a part of the process, but I know in our conversations, there's some other things that are added into as well. So if you wanted to start there, I think that'd be a good place for us to start.
Well, I've managed agencies for a long time. So my career started
Yeah,
mostly in recruiting agents. And when you are trying to sell the vision of what it means to be an agency owner and then work with them directly on their business models, the staffing is probably the most critical of everything. Marketing, of course, being a very big part of it, your skill set, being able to sell, but ultimately the team that you surround yourself is going to be the way you're going to scale up to make the real money, the real opportunity in this industry. And so for me, working in that capacity for years, learning how to identify talent, how to use tests like what Ideal Traits uses, understanding the value of assessments, and that entire process led me to understand how to take all the analytics and closing ratios, average premium, market closing ratios, all of those different aspects to figure out how to plug a staff person into that and make it a profit center. And so then really you take the emotion off the table. You're just eliminating question marks. You're identifying what kind of person is going to fit into your organization at the right time and how quickly you can scale that operation. And then how do you manage that team and how do you structure it? You know, compensation, roles that they would play. It's been a lot to learn, and I'm not necessarily the best that's out there. I'm kind of your middle to average with a lot of perspective and a lot of history of being on both sides of the fence between developing agencies and then developing my own agency and understanding that entire recruiting component. But I've been in recruiting technically now for 20 years. I've been an agency owner since 2018. So I've been from the management side on the corporate side to now the agency side. And so managing agents, this is the biggest hurdle, is to find the right type of staff, know when to hire them, know how to compensate them, know how to encourage them to stay with you and become profitable. And a lot of agents struggle with this topic, both in trying to find the right people and then how to compensate them properly and knowing the timing based on their metrics to how to make it a profit for their agency to scale.
sure. Yeah. And obviously both perspectives like that unpacks a lot of great information. So then on the agency side, I know that in our conversations you mentioned that you're currently looking to staff now. I believe it was yesterday we or Tuesday we talked about having 6 current staff members now, looking to add some additional folks onto as well. So in that process, when you're putting together job ads, I guess where I would start now is, are you looking for sales or customer service people right now, or is it both?
So in our cycle that we're in, and a lot of you guys are probably experiencing this across the country, we're in an interesting cycle. It's a lot of risk off with these carriers. So in my environment, I'm looking at purchasing other agencies. I'm looking at acquiring books. So I have a high service need. right now on one side of it. So on the property and casualty side for personal lines, I'm looking at acquiring really good, solid staff, but all of my staff sells. So it doesn't matter if you're targeted mostly for service, you're still going to be presenting cross sells, upsells, referrals. But then I'm also hiring for another side of my business, which is booming, which is on the commercial side. And so I've got some marketing that I've come across that's actually creating a pretty good pipeline where I'm overwhelmed with quotes. So now I'm hiring for specifically just sales on the commercial side. So I'm doing both. I'm taking advantage of the cycle. I'm seeing agents leaving and not realizing there's this huge opportunity for all of us that's probably going to last another year, year and a half, where if you're in the right position, and honestly, a lot of these companies look at what kind of staff you have in order to qualify for purchasing and taking advantage of this. So I've actually been talking to some of my local friends about them getting staffed up because they're not even going to look at you for these opportunities if you don't have at least the strength to bring on new policies, because some of these opportunities are like 2, 3, 4, $5 million that you can overnight acquire, and these companies are going to be looking at least on the captive side what kind of staffing you have in place. So I'm actually hiring right now to present my business plan to be able to acquire a lot of premium over the next 12 months.
Mm, mm. And I like that too. I know you mentioned that everyone in your agency, of course, is selling, right? So your service people, although they're in a service role, they're presenting cross sell options and these types of things. So in insurance, of course, over I think the last couple of years, that's been widely introduced as like the largest opportunity, and maybe even before that, within a book of business, right? For those that may be struggling to bring new business in the door. So w- when looking for a service person that's going to present, cross-selling options, what are you looking for? Like what types of traits or characteristics or past experience are you looking for out of those individuals when you're considering what your perfect candidate looks like?
So a lot of it just has to do with coaching. As far as background, I have, I mean, if I gave you a list of the type of backgrounds that have been successful with me, the honestly, the
Sure.
common denominator is coaching. Can they be coached? Are they driven? So when you do the ideal test, for instance, I look very much in that motivation and driven, whether it's compliance and other things, I can work with that just through, creating systems that I can plug them into. So I'm not as concerned about some of those metrics. But the driven aspect is important. And then working with them through the interview process to see, like, are they coachable? Do they follow instructions? I have an interview process that we can get into if you're interested, that kind of test that out in addition to the assessment, in addition to their background. But ultimately, the other problem too is to try to find people that you can develop. If you're looking for a full-time team member, if you're in a hurry, then you may have to go into the experience being prior sales or prior insurance where they're already licensed and you're not having to go through those hurdles. There's positives and negatives to both sides of that. It really just depends on your situation, how much time you have to develop someone, what your urgency is for the staff that you need. I covered a lot there. So to answer your question, I'm looking for someone that's coachable, and how I can determine that is faceted. I mean, it's going to be based on their resume. It's going to be based on the interview. It's going to be based on how they respond to my homework, and it's going to be based on the assessment that Ideal Traits provides me.
Got it. Okay. Perfect. And I think you touched on this a little bit. So do you generally have a preference whether you're looking for licensed or unlicensed candidates, or does it sort of depend on the time frame that you have, or are you open to all and really only looking for someone who is that coachable, who has that maybe a higher level of emotional intelligence, let's say? But do you have a preference either way generally, or does it really matter to you whether they're licensed or not?
So it's interesting. When I came into the agency in 2018, Farmers was running a program called the Protege Program. And these were people who were going to be producers, but they were temporary. They're going to leave you and go off and become their own agents. Highly
Sure.
rewarding for me financially. But if you're not with Farmers and you're not doing that program, all I can say with answering your question, what that identified for me is I needed people in quick and out quick. So I was really good at trying to identify people who were already with like a State Farm or Allstate or some of the other larger carriers looking to own their own agency and looking for a mentor. In that situation, they already had a license and it was very quick to bring them in, get them up to speed, and then move them out. I had to deal with some issues, but I knew they weren't long-term issues. Some of the training, they didn't stick. They were doing their own thing from the past. Some of those habits were difficult to manage and make it your own. Whereas if I am looking for a long-term permanent full-time employee, I honestly prefer someone who has zero experience. Two reasons. One, I probably wouldn't have to pay them as much because they don't know their value yet because we haven't established that. Two, they have no bad habits. And then three, they only know my culture. And if they're with me long term, that's the only culture I want them to be able to compare it with. So for long
Sure.
term, really solid employees that you have, I would say no insurance experience if you can spend the time with them, and you have the right person, you think you can dedicate that. You A lot of agents get once bitten, twice shy. With that, they'll spend all the time on the recruiting, on the licensing, they'll get them in, they'll do the training, and then the person up and leaves. And they're like, I'm not going through that again. And so it's a lot
Mhm.
easier for them just to say, well, they're already licensed, they're already proven, they're tested. I'm just going to go after licensed people. And honestly, there's that could be your skill set, that could be your situation. Again, that may be your best way to go about it in the beginning. I am right now looking more for people who aren't licensed primarily for the service side. If they're going to be producing, I have no problem bringing someone with some experience, and then it just depends on what their habits are. I'm actually going to interview them on coverage. I'm going to ask them to explain to me the coverages, see just how far off they are. Surprisingly and scary, when you ask them coverage questions, how much they really don't know. And so I've come across that a lot too. But to answer your question, it really just depends on what you're looking for. Long term, service related, no experience is my preference. If I'm trying to fill a gap where I've got too much inbound leads that I've created and I've got a funnel that I'm trying to fulfill, I will be tempted to go for the previously licensed person after I vet them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds as if there's pros and cons to both, right? So,
Yeah.
really what it comes down to is finding someone that fits best with your agency culture, right? Is what it sounds. So, and of course, finding someone that is coachable, whether they are already licensed or not. So, perfect. It looks like we do have a question that came in from the folks that are attending. Monica would like to know what homework, I know you mentioned this, what homework are you giving to the candidates as a part of that interviewing process? Um, I know you mentioned that at the beginning. So is there like some role play that you're conducting with them? I know you mentioned going over coverage. I guess going through what that process may look like would be perfect.
So the homework is after I do an interview, whether it's in person or a Zoom. I don't tell them on the front end. So I'm really testing their active listening skills and how they
Mhm.
comprehend a conversation, because it's really a test of intelligence and emotional IQ. So at the end of the interview, I simply ask them, I give them a deadline. I say, you've got 24 hours to put together a written recap of our interview based on my expectations, your expectations, and your understanding of the role and the vision that I've laid out.
Yeah.
And if they can't do that within 24 hours, you've got a problem on their first impression, supposed to be their best. It's only downhill from there. So if they can't meet the 24
Mhm.
hours, and if they can't articulate what you've talked about, and they've been sitting there you've been talking this whole time and they haven't registered anything, I mean, that's a big problem for me.
Yeah. And I think that's brilliant, because on the last success spotlight that we had last month with Jason Kilgo, he went through how he goes through a similar exercise where he gives them information that he wants them to go through and then have them basically recite it back to him. So very similar, and a good way to be able to help understand what a candidate's going to bring to the table. So, Andrew, another question had mentioned, how do you draw already licensed producers to your job posting? So I guess when you do look to find already licensed folks, what are you doing to help get them to be attracted to your ad, or what are you doing outside of your job ad to get in front of licensed people?
Interestingly enough, and this is a good question for me because in 2018, I moved to a different state. So, yes, I had a lot of experience, not just with the company, but with recruiting, but I had zero
Mhm.
network. I'm starting from scratch. And I have one employee with a small agency that I've built up very nicely, but I had to find staff without any network in my local area. And this is before people were really doing the remote. I mean, for the most part, this is still very much a brick and mortar. People are at their desk in
Sure.
2018. So with Ideal Traits, you put it out there. I didn't put P and C required, but I mean, you guys helped me present the job posting. So this was back in
Sure.
2018. But what I'll tell you is that once you do get someone licensed from that market and you treat them well and you show them that you have an amazing marketing model and compensation incentives, they will refer other people in their network that they have. And if I would go back and look at the number of people that I received that were just straight up referrals from initial people that I got through Ideal Traits, it's about 50% to 50%. So 50% coming in from Ideal Traits and the other 50% coming from people I got from Ideal Traits referring their own network.
Mhm.
That's how you kind of
Yeah.
crack in and get into I mean, you have to be a good manager and they have to like you. You have to provide a vision and then develop them to where they're actually improving and they enjoy that improvement and they want to bring their friends because they know that endorsing you is making them look good because they're providing great opportunity to someone that they care about.
Mm. Yeah. That's really good. So even for folks that are in your agency now, that referral source, or people that are applying and knowing that what your agency brings to the table, the culture, even probably your current clients too, as well, right? Current clients are bringing folks that they know that are maybe looking for a new opportunity at a different agency and bringing them through, which I think is awesome. So Gail had asked about remote staff. I know you mentioned it a little bit. So are you in a position now hiring remote staff? Do you have remote staff or have you done it before? I guess talking towards that process, I know it's become a lot more popular in the insurance space as of late because it's been difficult to find good qualified people. So I'm interested to hear if it's something that you've opened up to as well.
The first time I started remote staff was out of necessity because of 2020. At the time, I had 7 staff. We were growing, we were scaling. Actually, 2020 was one of my best years I've had on record, which is crazy.
Yeah,
So remote, I took people who were at the office and then set them up at home. Some did okay with that, some didn't. So then I
sure.
started learning from that sort of feedback. I currently have, to answer your first part of the question, yes, I have 4 people who are currently remote. I hired them to be remote mainly because when you look at the geographics and how far in at least in Atlanta area you can recruit to when you consider an hour
Sure.
drive could be only 20 miles away from your office, you are really limiting the talent that you can pull. So honestly, at this stage, with all the technology where we're at, and then you can track phone call volume now with VoIP services. You know if someone's clocked in and what kind of activity they're doing. It's easier to monitor, but it also is even more important to make sure that your assessment process and interview process is correct because not everybody is going to prosper in a remote environment. But I am
Sure.
very pro remote. I think it's a huge perk and incentive that can actually also lower how much you're paying because of the incentive of just being able to work at home can actually offset a lot of what you would normally have to pay to get them to commute 30, 45 minutes in and out of work.
Got it. Yeah. And because you're able to, I guess at that point too, you're able to get in front of candidates that are outside of your general vicinity of your office. So not only opening you up to a wider, more qualified talent pool potentially, but if you're in an area that is, I suppose, more of a higher income area, it could potentially open you up to areas maybe where you could offer less than that and have remote as a benefit.
I,
So
I've got 2 that are in a very rural area and
mm,
their cost of living is very low, but they're incredible talent. And so they're
yeah,
probably an hour and a half away from my office. And we will get together about once a month and do a lunch and learn, and I'll pay to have them drive in, spend time with them. But yeah, that exactly to your point. I'm in the middle of a very high cost of living. And so if I'm hiring someone in my market, their demand for their salary or hourly is going to be much higher.
mm, yeah. Yep. And I think it's important too, something that you touched on there, where you guys do get together. I think you said once a month to do a lunch and learn. I think that engagement too for them. Obviously, if it's possible to do once a month, great. But if they live, across the country or several states away, it might be a little bit harder to put something like that together. But still offering the option for them to get together with you and the rest of the team to bring everyone together to have something like a lunch and learn, I think is great. It makes people feel more about or more a part of the agency culture, the agency team, those types of things. And I imagine that's what you're going for there.
We do a lot of virtual huddles. I mean, now you've got teams, you
Sure.
have, I use Slack. I use Slack Huddle.
Mm,
It's practically free and it's very effective. And we jump on and do training. We do a lot of remote training one-on-one, depending on what the questions
sure.
or issues are. But yeah, we're doing weekly training and huddles. And then once a month, our goal is to try to get us all together. I do have one remote person that's like in 3 states away, and they do a lot of service work, and they're not coming into the office, but they do the huddles with us, and that's still fine. It works out great.
Perfect. All right. And then John has a question here. He mentions, how do you monitor productivity? I know you talked about this a little bit, but he mentions that Apex is a tough system to be able to track service employees. So, in general, for you, when it comes to that tracking at a remote level, how what systems did you implement to make that happen?
I use Agency Zoom. I don't use Apex. It's a third party. It has a lot of integration. And then I also have a VoIP through Nerdphone. And most of the VoIPs have this. If you're not utilizing it, maybe check with your provider. But I get a daily email that tracks everyone's inbound, outbound, and time. So I look at quality of the calls. All of our calls are recorded. I will audit those and also have Coach Whisper, which is basically if I'm see that someone's line is lit up, I can listen in on the call like remote without them knowing that I'm on the call. I think it's called whisper coaching. So I've got that. So I can just audit occasionally what is being said. I can pull recordings. I can also check to see what sort of activity that they're doing. I know what a day is supposed to look like. And so if they have low call volume, I can let it go for one day. But if there's a trend, then I have to address it to find out what's going on.
Mhm.
And I send out the results. And the results is a positive. If there's a negative, I never put the negative in the email. I always highlight whoever's doing the best. So it's kind of like you're pulling instead of pushing with your leadership skills. And that also is an indication that obviously you're looking at it. And so they can't hide from it. And you do this early on, right when they start in the organization, that becomes part of your culture. So maintaining the transparency of how you're measuring that metrics is important. The agency Zoom, back to the production question, I can see the quote volume, I can see the quote closing. If their closing ratios are off, then we have a training opportunity there because I know the market, I know the lead source. If their closing ratio is low, then they're wasting my marketing dollars, and they're also probably not having much fun. So instead of it looking at it as a negative, I look at it as a positive to go in and say, hey, you have a lot of opportunity here. So and so with the same leads is getting a little bit better closing ratio. Let me share with you what they're doing. And I've listened to some of your calls. There's some areas of improvement here, but the good news is that we can get you better sales. And with your incentive package, you'll be able to make more money. So I entice it from that standpoint. I try never to be negative as a coach and as a manager. I can look at the metrics. There's negatives in the metrics, but it's how do I approach the staff to be able to lift them and to get them on track. But you have to have metrics. You have to have transparency. You have to have systems where you can manage, especially if you've got people that are remote. It's a little bit harder. So the only thing you can rely on is the technology that we have now.
Mm, yeah. And I like how you said pulling rather than pushing, right? Focusing on the positives and the metrics and sort of pulling everyone up to want to be
Yeah,
at that positive level. I think that's great. We have a compensation question here from Andrew.
those are
He
fun.
wanted to ask if what's that?
Those are always the best, the compensation questions. It's so hard to
Yeah,
answer, but go
yeah.
ahead.
Yep. He said, have you found more success with a higher base and lower commission percentage or higher or lower base, higher commission?
You're always negotiating when you hire someone, and some of this comes about from those negotiations. I have one that was trying, she started with me very low base, higher incentive. Then she got pulled by someone that was trying to hire her, another competitor. I won't mention their name. Um, but they were doing a very high base, low incentive. So
Mm,
it ended up being that that was what she wanted. And so I just put a cap on they had to meet a certain premium threshold before they made any commission because I was covering the base. It's kind of like a draw. And if they're not hitting that anyway, they're not working out for me. So I'm like, if you want the comfort of a
sure.
larger base, that's fine. I just have to work the metrics because then if you want a higher base, then it just means that I'm going to have to be a lot stricter with your performance, that you're a profit center. If you
Yeah.
want to have more of an uncapped and more leveraged opportunity from an incentive standpoint, then yeah, the base has to be offset. So I have to have a lower base to provide that. And you don't want to be too inconsistent too, because unfortunately, despite what you realize, your staff are talking to one another. So you can get into a little bit of a resentment situation. It shouldn't happen in a professional environment. Over my time being as an agency owner, it's happened a couple of times. And so I am
Sure.
trying to be a lot more consistent with the title and then the pay. But it's really not fair to me because some people come in with more experience, more capability, their production. So I don't know how to answer that clean, except that every single one of your employees is really a negotiation, and you should be following up and setting that in your onboarding letter or offer letter that you're going to have a predetermined 90-day and then a predetermined 6 months, a predetermined 1 year review. And so you can start them with a low base and say, look, we can run with this for 90 days as a probationary period, and then we can renegotiate what makes sense. And then you got some numbers to go off of and then see what they want. But you have to make sure it's in your favor because you got to make money. So
Mm,
I would say if you're not sure, then simply set it in motion, knowing that you've got a 90-day review coming up, and then let them know, hey, in 90 days, we're going to talk about this anyway. And that takes and alleviates some of that pressure in the beginning where maybe you want to do a low base before you start giving entitlement. Because once you go up on that base, you're never going back down.
mm. Yeah. And it sounds like there's no perfect solution to that, but it sounds like it's geared around setting your expectation and then
Yeah.
just being transparent with it, right? When you're talking to them, like, hey, if you want that higher base, sure, but there's going to be a higher expectation that we have for you, right? To be able to
Right.
make that happen. So, all right. Another compensation or commission question here. We talked about cross selling, of course, on the service side. How are, I guess, you compensating those service folks? Is there just a set amount that you have? Is it similar to the way that, yeah, I guess, when you're hiring salespeople, that conversation goes, or is it a set amount? Does it vary? I guess in general, how does the compensation work when service staff is cross selling?
So when you're servicing, you start to look at technology. It's brilliant if you have your agency set up now because you can manage so much more premium now than you've ever been able to in the past. And so majority of your income obviously is the service. I mean, it's probably 80%, if not 90 on a large agency. If you're a smaller agency, not the case, but that's what you're hoping for in the future is to get to the point where a majority of your income is just service. So that becomes a very big part of your revenue, and you have to look at it as an opportunity cost based on your retention and how well you're servicing the existing book, especially in this environment. So that staff person who is predominantly focused on service, their value is going to be more salary because they're already built in value just getting the phone calls and handling those service because that's making you money with the retention of your residuals. And so then you would still incentivize them for the new business so that you can give them that kick for just doing an excellent job by adding new lines of business and by upgrading, get the life insurance appointment set. Another thing I will tell you just on that note for service, if you're trying to hit life numbers, we're all trying to hit life numbers. The companies have that as a carrot all the time for your bonuses and everything else involved. Plus, it's one of the most important products we offer. But I have found that if you're trying to move the dial with your team when it comes to life insurance, at least from my perspective, I'm strong on the life, so I just incentivize them to set the appointments. If they're not ready to take and engage the application and the needs analysis, just identify those opportunities and then shift that. And then I pay them very well for those just to give them an incentive and then try to train them from those appointments and let them sit in on those, watch how I close it. And then as they want to, with their own ambition, take that over. But I do a heavy incentive on the life insurance. I pay out a lot. on those just because it's a harder thing to get your team to engage in. And I have so much leverage in terms of how I make my money just based on those life insurance optics to the company. But as far as the pay, it's going to be a higher base because that residual is a huge part of your income. So you're paying for that.
Mm, yeah, makes total sense. And I like the heavy on the life and giving them that extra incentive if that's what you're looking to, I guess, really highlight at that current time too, which is good. Gail is asking if you have them take the Ideal Traits personality test prior to an interview or after an interview. So I know it, of course, sends out automatically, but is there any differences as a part of your process? Is there any particular point that you have them take it that may be different than, I suppose, what the normal process may look like?
At this stage in the game, I'm pretty lazy. I don't want to spend a ton of time unless I know what I'm dealing with. I mean, seriously, if they don't do the assessment, that's already a red flag. I'm done. I'm only going to look at people, and that's what's great about Ideal Traits. I mean, you guys provide a really good volume. So then now you're automating that volume to try to sift through all those results so that you're not picking one out of three people in your network. You're picking one out of maybe even 100 that you're looking at. And the more narrow that decision metrics is, the better quality consistency you're going to get for recruiting. So yes, they have to do the assessment before I'm ever talking to them.
Yeah. So before, yeah. So there's another question here that asks about your experience potentially with hiring adjusters that then get a production license. Do you have any experience hiring in that? It seems as if that it has worked for this particular agent. But any experience there? Any thoughts?
Well, if you're working for a reputable company that is on the captive side, having an adjuster with any experience is going to be a great producer because they can really believe in the product that they're offering. So their
Mm,
expertise adds enormous value to a conversation with the client because they have so many live examples to provide as a way of explaining coverage that's real, and it's going to always get the attention to the client to sell value over price. And so, especially if you're in a captive situation where your price is more fixed and you're not shopping the rate like an independent, then on the captive side, having a person with a claims adjuster background, I think would be a huge value.
mm, perfect. Yeah. And I think that it was more of this is what has been done in the past and could be beneficial. And then, Gail, I'm your commercial lines producer. Do you have a marketer to help set appointments, or do they call and set their own appointments?
Okay, so I own a marketing company and I do a lot of the marketing for my agency. So I funnel the leads. I feel like that's probably my primary job as an agency owner is to figure out how to funnel leads and then provide. And I do discriminate my staff in terms of who's getting which leads based on their competency and their return on my investment. So, it's
Mm,
like they always say, you want five lines in the water. So I do some telemarketing. I do a lot of SEO work with my Google page. I really promote a lot of reviews to get it both organically and Google Ads. I do direct mail. I own my own direct mail company that I use to push my agency up the leaderboard for years and had done that for my agents back home. So I've been doing direct mail for 13 years now, and I funnel that in. So between all the different things that I do, I don't really have time to pay a staff person to do a lot of outbound calls. I need them in the seat working with like high incentive client or prospects that are interested in quotes. And then
mm,
I want them to be able to just hit a high volume of quoting versus a high volume of outbound cold calling. I outsource my cold calling outside the office where I'm paying, $5 to $6 an hour versus paying, someone in the seat that's could be $20 to $25 an hour. It's a waste of money, in my opinion, based on closing ratios. So I funnel the marketing. That's my job. I try to get the marketing dollars and then you hire to your pipeline. And that's when you can start to scale. And that's what's exciting about having something like Ideal Traits, where if you catch something and you get hot, and you know how it is, the cheese is always moving. Something that's working great one year may not work great the next year. So you have to have 5 things you're always kind of messing with, and maybe one outlier that you're experimenting, willing to throw a little bit of stupid money at, just to see if you can get something that's hot. Everything's changing, but once you get something that's hot, well, now you created a problem, and if you can scale that good problem, then now you have to hire to that to leverage your marketing. And that's how you do it. A lot of guys go backwards. They have no marketing, and they hire someone expecting that person to be the marketer and to draw and bring in all that business. Now, if you hired someone whose father is the CEO of a mortgage company, that's probably a great idea, because you're creating a niche through the person you're hiring. So I'm not trying to throw that out. That's absolutely a good hire if it comes with a niche marketing angle. But majority of your hires don't have that. So you need to have a pipeline that you're building that you can plug the person into. And so something like an agency Zoom, which tracks all of your quotes not closed, that could be your pipeline. Something that just plugs in and says, okay, these are people that I have spent money on. I've been quoting, I've built a pipeline. I don't have anyone working that. Well, outbound calls on those could be okay in the beginning, just to create momentum. But to answer your question, I do the marketing mostly and just funnel it down to my staff.
Gotcha. And it's nextdirectmail.com. Is that right, Drew? If they want to check
Yeah,
out
I just
the marketing company that you're into.
everything had been word of mouth. I didn't market this company at all. I was just helping agents out. And then
Sure.
somebody recommended, it's like, just put your website out because I want to endorse you. So I got a few people who endorse me now. And so I developed the website last year. And if you go there, you just fill it out, and I'd be happy to talk to you about your market. I turn away probably 50% of the agents that I'm talking with because their market just doesn't make sense. I have an ROI calculator that we plug in the numbers. You don't want to be emotional about these decisions. You want to look at it objectively. If the numbers make sense, then it's probably a good marketing tool. It's going to be your cherry on top. It's not going to be your primary. These are expensive leads, but it could be that differential that gets you from where you're not bonusing to where you are bonusing. And we'll say, from a culture standpoint, of all the leads that I get that come in, those are my SaaS favorite leads, because the intent is so high that they do close at the highest rate of anything else that I'm providing them. So when I provide the marketing, when I'm talking about that, that is actually their favorite one that comes in, because they have like a 60% closing ratio, whereas like a call in from the Google is about 25, and a cold call is probably about 8 to 9. So which one do you
Sure.
think they'd prefer to try to close?
Mm, yeah. Perfect. And for those, I put the Next Direct Mail link in the chat. So if you want to check that out,
Thank you.
go ahead and
Yeah,
just click
I'm
the
not
link
doing this for
and
that
take a peek in.
endorsement, but I appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, of course. Of course. Yeah. Perfect. And then we have a question from Coco. What do you think about the idea of hire/fire as fast as you can? So, of
Yeah,
course, I think
slow to
generally
hire.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, slow to hire, quick to fire is the general, I think,
yeah.
term that's most popular. But this is hire, fire as fast as you can. So try to hire
Well, let's
people,
talk
and
about the
if they're not working out,
psychology. Yeah, let's talk about
yep,
the psychology of that. I've been managing agents for a long time, over 100 agents. What you often find, and a lot of people are going to start nodding when I say this. When you hire somebody, it's kind of like your pride is involved, because that was your choice to hire that person into your operation. And so when they're not working out, it's kind of the sting to your pride, like, "Ooh, I screwed up. I hired
yeah,
someone bad. They shouldn't have even been in my operation." Well, you need to manage your own psychology in that respect. There's two things too on the slow to hire, and then I'll talk about how you can manage your psychology to fire. Because that the first time you ever do that as a business owner is you're not sleeping the night before, you're not eating, you're having anxiety, you're a good person, you hate that you're about to possibly injure this person financially, even though you know you have to because they're not profitable. But the hiring thing, what I do, I didn't mention this earlier, we have HR restrictions, right? There's certain questions you can ask in an interview and certain things you can get into that you don't, you can't get into the drama aspect of what's going on in this person's life. But if you let them come into your office and work for a couple of days or just shadow for a day, And you offer it this way: it's like, look, for you to feel comfortable working in my operation, why don't you come in and sit down and shadow one of my staff? You can see what a day today looks like. You can see if it's really something you're interested in. There's two things you accomplish. One, make sure that the person knows what kind of work they're going to be doing and what that looks like. And two, they're going to talk. They're going to talk about their boyfriend or their husband or some other kind of or girlfriend. They're going to talk about what's going on at home. They're going to get comfortable with your staff. Then you're going to talk with your staff and like, hey, should I bring them on the team? Because you have to work with this person I'm about to hire. And sometimes they're like, Drew, I'm not going to tell you what they told me, but do not hire this person. And so
Yeah,
that's happened, and it saved me a
yeah,
lot of drama. I never could have identified with the ideal traits metrics, with the resume, with my interview. All their best intentions of putting their best foot forward succeeded, and I missed it. And so
yeah.
part of that's just making sure you do a really good job on the front end before you hire someone, so you don't get the back end where you have to fire. Now, have I had to fire someone? Yes. And how I determine to make that easy for me is, again, when you hire someone, you put them on a 90-day probation period. If you're not seeing traction within 90 days, it shouldn't be a surprise to them that you're having to let them go.
Mm,
If they make it past 90 days, I usually never have a problem. I'm going to find
yeah.
out within 90 days. It's kind of like you buy a used car. If it's got a problem and someone was selling you a lemon or something, you're going to know within 90 days.
Most certainly, especially with setting that expectation right from the beginning, right? You'll either know if they're going to fall into that and be able to meet your expectation or not. I think that's good. I'll jump back a little bit here. When it comes to finding that unlicensed talent, do you use any sort of resource to help them get licensed? Like, is there anything in particular that you go to more than another? Maybe it's just an internal process that you have. Maybe it's a company that you've been using. But a question that we get quite often is when it comes to licensing, what support is provided around that? So, any experience that you have in that aspect of helping people get licensed, I think would be a good question to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty big agency. I've got a decent budget for onboarding. So, take this for what it is. I give you context. Yeah, I'm going to lose a lot of
Yeah.
money. It's going to be expensive onboarding when I hire someone because I'm going to pay them for their time. I'm going to pay for the license and for the course.
Mm,
If I do I mean, because of that, I'm doing it because of the time frame. They get 1 week paid. But if they go past 1 week, I'm not paying for that. So I've got a set cost. It may be six, $700 just to pay for their time to study, plus the course, plus the license. You may be looking at $1,000 to onboard an unlicensed person. But I can tell you right now, they don't come in with bad habits and they're a solid individual and they've passed all of your assessments and they're a good quality
mm,
individual that's coachable and intelligent. That $1,000 is probably going to be cheaper than what it's going to cost you to get someone who's already licensed, because they're going to demand a higher pay to compete with the market right now, which is paying a lot of money. So you have to
mm,
look at it that from that standpoint as well. But it
yeah.
says a lot to the person that you're hiring if you're willing to sacrifice that on the front end. And it is a risk because I have hired someone, gone through that entire process, and within that 90 days, I had to fire them. And then, this is that once bitten, twice shy psychology of agency owners where they don't want to go through that again. And you know what I tell these guys? Grow up and be a business owner and just look at the long term. What is this going to
Sure.
provide you? Don't make your assessment on one bad experience early in your career and then judge that for the rest of your career. You're never going to scale your business. You're never going to get big. You're never going to become that millionaire agency owner.
Mm, yeah. And return on investment, of course, is always a topic of conversation, right? When considering bringing on staff. So, if you're out there looking to calculate the return on investment that's available for finding good salespeople, our CEO Kevin Milner put together a return on investment calculator that's in your Ideal Traits account now. So, if you log into your account, go to the dashboard at the top left, the ROI calculator will be there on the right, so you can calculate what the return on investment will be for you when finding good qualified salespeople. So we'll answer one final question here from the chat, Drew, and then we'll go on our way. But um, it should be an easy one. Do you set goals for the producers in terms of sales numbers in the first 90 days? I know you talked about how that it's generally if they make it to the 90 days and beyond it, you don't have a problem, and usually you find out before. So, do you what I guess goals do you set for them in that first 90-day probationary period?
So this question is variable. I will tell you my answer for my market, but if you look at yours, maybe you're a high premium state, maybe you're a low premium state, maybe your current closing ratios based on the market conditions is low or high. If it's high and it's high premium, then it needs to be a high number. It needs to be relative to, okay, here's how I can manage this. I would say in the first 90 days, it needs to be a minimum half of what you hope and expect. So let's say in my case, I expect it to be, $40,000 a month. So then I would want to set it at 20,000, but then I would probably take the first 20 out on the first month. And so I'm going to put 40,000. Does that make sense? So it'd be 40,000 would be the normal for monthly. I'm going to set that as my 90-day minimum because I need to see how they onboard, get used to my systems, plug them into my pipelines, start getting, because they don't have a pipeline that's built. So you can't judge them based on your current staff that has a pipeline that's got a 90-day tail. Because you got a 90-day
Mhm.
tail of momentum that is created. That you're just starting the flywheel on this individual. So don't have over crazy expectations of them jumping right in and making a ton of money for you in that first 90 days. But you do have to have a metric that is common sense to where if they're not hitting at least that minimum, then that's part of what, and it says in my offer letter that if they don't hit this number within 90 days, then they're gone,
Mm.
unless there's something extended, unless it's something I can negotiate with them or reposition them in some other capacity. There's something else that was going on. I'm not heartless, but yeah, I would say whatever you would want their monthly goal to be, I would set that as an absolute make or break minimum for the first 90 days. That's just my experience.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Well, Drew, thank you again for
Yeah,
joining and bringing your experience and talking through what you've done in order to be successful in the staffing and recruiting space. So, for those of you that have joined us for all three sessions, thank you. For those of you that maybe this is your first time, earlier in the webinar, I did put the link to the YouTube that sends you to the first and second Success Spotlight. First one being with Rose Crandall, second one being with Jason Kilgo, and then of course Drew's will be uploaded there tomorrow. But if you are looking for assistance with getting unlicensed staff licensed, there are two great resources within your IdealTraits account in the marketplace, either through Excel Solutions or ExamFX. And then if you're looking for support when it comes to training, we of course have Role Play at the Olson Agency and Insurance Sales Labs in there. So I appreciate you all for joining us this afternoon. Drew, thank you again for
yeah,
bringing so much great information to the table and for being willing to share it with all the agents here today. So
my
appreciate you all. We'll
pleasure.
see you next month at Success Spotlight number 4 with independent agent Drew Hodson. Thank you again, Drew.